Okay. A passion to be flexible. I wanted to introduce myself. I work, at Maxis, and if you're not familiar, it is a part of Electronic Arts. We've done games such as SimCity, The Sims, Spore, and I've had, really the blessing to work on all of those. It's something that I really firmly believe in play. I think it's a transformational experience. I think we learn from play in ways that have really sort of spoken from my childhood all the way through to my career. I've been in the gaming industry for over 20 years. Okay, it's really changed its face, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But it's really about how I really reflected, and it wasn't something that I knew right away about myself. I knew I was always into gaming, but it's how I've reflected over time and started to think about how my experience has brought forward this idea that play is a sort of a backbone of how I not only got into gaming, but how I also have led a career that is actually where I am today. So I'm going to step back, and I promise not to regale you with stories about how I had to walk to school both ways uphill, but I am going to start with my childhood because it really does inform who I am. I grew up in Michigan, and I'm going to prove it to you because I grew up right here in Grand Rapids. If anybody is from Michigan, they'll recognize that. And the nice thing about Michigan, a little bit different than, sort of when I first moved out to the Bay Area, and these like postage stamp houses and everything, is big yards. We had Lake Michigan, that my family and I were at all of the time. I don't remember any day of my life where I wasn't outside, literally from like dawn till dusk. My mom used to blow a moose horn to get us home. And that's because I was in this really large neighborhood, and we were constantly playing anywhere, and the only way to get us home was to have something loud enough for us to hear. Like I said, it didn't matter what the season was, we were playing outside. I had a group of friends, and it was throughout the neighborhood, and it would just change all the time, but lots of different personalities who would come together, and we'd hang out. Often, we'd build things. If we were at the lake, we'd build sandcastles. If we were in our backyards, it was tree houses. It was just this world that we would create on our own. Now, there are times when it would rain. And in my house, we had this sort of unfinished basement. It was a little dark and dank. My dad had this pool table. It was this coin-operated pool table. Billiards wasn't really all that interesting, and anyways, there were too many of us to make that a good game. So it wasn't about that pool table. It was about a group of kids coming together and using our imaginations to create an entirely different world. I remember we played pirate ship in that basement. It was just a sea full of sharks. But the interesting thing, everybody had a role. Play is transformative because you have to come together. You need to collaborate, cooperate. You have visionaries, you have leaders, you have people who have to play the role of the oarsman. You have the people who have to lift the sails. We had my little sister who always had to walk the plank. But she was really good at it. There was drama, there were sharks, there were screams. It was fun. And you see the dynamic change about who's leading and where you're taking it. But a shared vision to realize is something that comes from play. And if you watch a group of kids play, you'll understand the dynamics that take place. Sometimes groups work out really well. Sometimes it takes a little bit of separation to figure out who's going to play exactly what role. But that dynamic, that change, and that common shared vision of a team of people coming together, something that as I've moved along in my career, I've really thought about. Now, the other big thing that is just part of who I am, I love building stuff. I like taking things apart, I like building it back together again. In my house, we had this thing, we called it the playroom. My mom and dad didn't really like televisions, but we had a playroom, and really, I think really what it was just an indestructible room. No furniture, linoleum floor, a bunch of cupboards full of blocks, dominoes, you name it. But we would take them apart, build them up, back up together. We had epic domino strings that we would knock down. I think my favorite thing of all was when my dad took me out and got me my first sort of Rube Goldberg experience, which was in the form of Mousetrap as a game when I was a kid. So this idea of building an imagination and putting things back together again kind of followed me through my life. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I went to school at University of Michigan, and I studied cognitive development. It's fascinating. Again, this process of taking things apart and putting them back together again. How do people think? How do the gears work? It sort of just fell in with me because this idea of putting together blocks or dominoes or houses or playing in the sandcastles and everything. Again, it was sort of how do people think? How do they perceive? How do they learn to take a look at the world around them and make sense of it? And I found that, yet another fascinating aspect of things. I'm going to fast forward a little bit again. After college, I played this game, SimCity. Okay. Well, that's when everything kind of came together. In college, I had taken a couple programming courses, and I found the logic of it and the ability to kind of realize results on your own just really fascinating. SimCity is a game that it deconstructs something in the real world. It puts it back together again with an interface that you get to interact with. The process of playing it is where you learn the gears. You have a simulation that brings the city to life underneath your fingertips, and it pushes back at you. And as you figure out why it's pushing back, or why the citizens are complaining about trash and everything, you form a new perception of the world around you. And I found this whole idea of sort of deconstructing something and putting it back together again in a way that really made you relate to the real world to be incredibly special. I also found the experience of playing it creative. And it was sort of then that I knew that's where I wanted to gravitate. I loved the programming, I loved cognitive development, I loved gaming. It wasn't that I was ever so, completely cognizant of where I wanted to take that passion or anything, but I moved out to California and I got into gaming. And I went all the way from tech support on up to production and other roles. So let me kind of show you a little bit of where I've been. LucasArts, Electronic Arts, and when Electronic Arts eventually acquired Maxis, that was my dream job. I was like, oh, me, I have to get there. I happened to be on maternity leave at the time that the acquisition took place. I called up the guy who had actually formulated the acquisition, and I'm like, I have to work there. But it's this idea of play that started to form a little bit about how I conducted myself. Now, why? We ask why. Why do you wake up in the morning and get up and go into work each day? The one piece of this why, and I think that just the letter Y is an interesting one, is because there are kind of a separate path. The passion that I have and the career that I have. And they do form different parts of what it is that you get up and do every day. The passion that I have is I love making games. I just think that it's my North Star. To create experiences that people are going to play and kind of bring themselves into, and I have gravitated toward that style of game with SimCity and The Sims, which engage players' imaginations. They're full of creativity tools that players like to use to kind of deviate from what it is that we create, a single path or a linear path, but they're incredibly immersive. And I think that those experiences are something that do transform people and can really affect their lives. And I'll talk a little bit to why that's a passion of mine. So that's my North Star. I've had the opportunity to work on any number of games, some of them story puzzle adventures, some of them simulations like The Sims, a whole evolution game that was about creativity called Spore, SimCity, and we'll be releasing Sims 4 this year. These are big games, and I work for a big company, the pressure of being in a public company. But the thing that's interesting, and I'm going to relate it back to that pool table, is in order to realize these games, in order to build them, and see not a pirate ship, but a world that comes together as a city, cellular life that evolves into technology and space traveling, aliens, or the kind of creativity tool that allows you to make yourself and put yourself in a game and experience, playing and experimenting with you and your friends in ways that make you think differently about social relationships. Take a team, all right? It's just like those kids playing on the pool table back in my hometown, kind of trying to create that imaginary world of the pirate ship. Now I work with designers, engineers, writers, producers, and I have to take a group of people and figure out how do we share a vision and get to where it is that we want to go. And one of the big takeaways, not while I was necessarily building up my experience, but now that I'm kind of looking back at it, is that working with a team really means understanding everybody's role, respecting their strengths and their skills and what they bring to the table. But it is also about leadership, and I do think that having a group of people that come from diverse backgrounds, gender, race, that really have different perspectives brings you sort of a more interesting dynamic. The kind of texture of the games that we become different. When Will Wright first envisioned Sims, he called it, he wrote down Maslow's hierarchy of needs. he created a game that was a nice little consumerist tool. You bought objects to fulfill your needs, and you then worked in order to get more money to buy more objects that would fulfill your needs, giving you a little bit of free time to make friends, to fulfill your needs, to advance your career. It wasn't until the women on the team expressed, hey, these little people that we're putting to sort of experience these objects in this world, they're kind of more interesting than the chair or the couch or the kitchen or anything in the whole thing. And the fact that they had free will, and this idea that it was the people that were the inspiring part about it, and that families and aging and that sort of social experience, it wasn't until then that it really became The Sims. And it was that investment and the openness of somebody like Will, who is like jaw-droppingly crazy brilliant, to be accepting of new and other opinions in that environment. It is a team of superpowers. It is a team of diverse opinions that gets shaped by leadership, that is really thinking about how you form a team to begin with. And I can't tell you how important those early stages of anything that you do, in terms of figuring out what your vision is, really helping everybody embrace that, making critical decisions early, starting games right as opposed to thinking about later, and getting those, really understanding and having every one of those risks put on the table. Are we going to create a completely new genre? Are we going to use all new technology? Do we have people who are new in their roles? All of these questions are really that core construct, and really starting things right is something that will help you succeed in the long run. So that's one really key takeaway, is this diverse idea of skills and importance of embracing other opinions. The thing that keeps me in making games is I have had the opportunity to hear back from players. There's nothing so invigorating as getting feedback. And now in today's world, it goes so much faster. You're putting games out at a more rapid pace. You can put out a website and have instant feedback. You can directly communicate with people. They can directly communicate with you. Sometimes it's very harsh. We try to take this as constructive, but we've affected people that, one girl who made an entire story in The Sims because we exposed all of our tools to the players so that they could do anything they wanted to with this creativity tool that had an honor in it. And she created a story of a homeless dad and daughter. And it's beautiful, and it's compelling and moving. We've got, kids who have become urban planners because of their experience in Sim City. We've got, artists who have created, the most crazy-looking creatures and exported them in Maya and really were influenced to become, sort of game makers themselves. So inspiring people through play has been one of the most satisfying parts of my career. I also express that I do think people learn. They learn through the experience. We've been able to collaborate with Glass Lab, which is a collaboration between the MacArthur Foundation, Electronic Arts, and ESA, and the Gates Foundation. They're putting games into the classroom because when you can experience something and touch it and begin to understand, how it works, you engage more with it. Sim City, we turned over the entire source code to Glass Lab. They created a pollution scenario, and they put it in a school in low socioeconomic areas. One of them in Florida. And I'm sitting there watching this video of kids in that area just enraged that somebody had zoned an industrial lot in their neighborhood, and they were taking it to their own city council to get this zoning over. And I was like, oh my God, these kids are talking about zoning. And I think, that's again another compelling element of what play brings you, is that it can make you think differently about the world. I think gaming is also something that, there's something about games that's about achievement. We feed Scooby snacks along the way. You can succeed in games if you look at it. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be the best Twitch gamer, but it is something that I think is really optimistic about games. And I think it's something that, that idea of achievement can translate into real life as well. So that other path, career. Because, everybody in this room has a certain amount of ambition for their own career, and I certainly do as well. And it wasn't that it was a strong beat. I really find myself in the gaming industry. You're going to recognize maybe something about these two photos. Wow, it was a pretty male-dominated industry. There's 4 girls on the SimCity team. There's 1 girl on the other one, and the story of my first GDC. I went. It was in San Jose, and I was asked out to dinner with my coworkers, and so we went to dinner. And I looked around, and I was like, oh my God, this entire restaurant, every table, only men. I was mistaken for a waitstaff. And I was like, wow, this is a really different environment to be working in. I've learned to play with it a little bit. I think the games industry is changing, but I still work with a lot of guys. Sometimes I have to sit there and go, Steve, Tom, Brian, Ed, Alex, I made so many in any one conference. But November came along, and I'm probably one woman in gaming that has more fake mustaches tucked in her desk drawer than anybody. But I got to play, with that, and we made a lot of money in November, just in donations and getting social networking around the cause. But it was really fun to get around with that. One year they all threw button checks. But I think, one thing I wanted to show you is this is how gaming is changing, and I think it's an important change. Because I think, like I said, if we get more diversity behind the computer, I think we're going to get a much more interesting palette of games to play with. So these are dated. When I got finally to SPORE, it wasn't changing that much. The size of teams were bigger, but the overall sort of distribution of women in gaming was still pretty small. But today's gaming is changing, and I think that as we were saying, that mobile space is really kind of opening up an opportunity for smaller teams, for new entrepreneurship to get into this and to kind of find your own space. You don't have to be a AAA publisher. The production levels and the cost of entry is lower. So now all of a sudden we're seeing startups. We're seeing startups led by women. We're seeing new women who were born gaming and they're coming into gaming from a technology point of view or production with a passion for it. And I love the fact that it's creating an entirely new environment for gaming. I want to encourage that. And the fact that we're going to see gaming proliferate even to smart devices like TV again opens up this world and an opportunity to bring more women into gaming because, like I said, play is transformational. I think we need this kind of experience in our life. Now, that said, in corporate America, it kind of feels like 1950s sometimes still, okay? Only 16% of the Fortune 500 boards are made up of women. I think it's like about 15% of corporate officers are women in the Fortune 500. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and I work in a big corporation. We still have a very low percentage of women that are actually rising in the ranks and becoming some, senior sort of drivers of our company. But the thing is, it is not a woman's issue. It is, I consider gender bias to kind of be natural. It's one of those things, it's cultural, it's societal. And it isn't something that's going to change because we make it into a woman's issue. It's something that has to be an open dialogue. And it's, again, one of those things that now I'm a little bit later in my career, I feel, invested in sort of driving that dialogue. I've had the opportunity to have a new CEO come into being, as of just last November, Andrew Wilson. He just turned 40, he's kind of really, a go-getter. He's really thinking about player first, which changed the dynamic and the culture of our organization. And some of the first conversations that I've had with him sitting on his staff have really been about, he opened the door to having a conversation about my experience in the corporate world. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. So the next thing I did is I went back to my office and I put together a few things that I thought might be influential. Kind of a get in touch with your feminine side, primer. And just in terms of like some of the challenges that women meet in business, and particularly as, we try to take on entrepreneurship, all of the perceptions and the way that, sort of that gender bias plays out in the corporate world. And mostly it's just what it's become is a dialogue, and it's something that I touch upon quite briefly later in my one-on-ones. And I do think that it's both that we need to do. So that idea of balance, you brought it up yourself. It's I don't know, those television commercials where a baby's sleeping and you're working on them, doesn't happen, okay? I found, the pitfalls and the steps of being a woman and moving through your career to be challenging. And one of the things I want to point out is, I think I myself became my own worst enemy. I measured myself by 1950s, sort of housewife mother, God's sake, she's, juicing oranges for breakfast. I mean, who has time for that? At the same time as judging myself by, sort of 90s career women power. And it's not a combination that necessarily works out all that well. And I think another takeaway is that outreach, the connection, the thing that allows you to express this is crazy what I'm going through. And to sort of laugh at yourself about it and to give yourself a little bit of leeway in terms of that crazy period of time. In my own career, it definitely was, while late 20s, early 30s, having babies and figuring all of that out while I'm juggling my career, it definitely gives sort of a plateau. But it doesn't mean you have to stop at that. And again, I think my passion pulled me through in terms of how I wanted to do that. And one of the things I always had was returning to the fact that I was making games. And so I think that core value, that idea, and that understanding of what you want to do can ultimately help you even through some of those challenges that you have. You know, one of the pieces of career advice that I've gotten throughout my career is if you want to kind of succeed, you have to replace yourself. You know, and I'm like, that's so weird because I build all these chops and how, you know, my experience and my understanding of what I'm doing. And one of the hardest things to do is to sort of say, let me cultivate somebody else to take that role on so I can kind of, you know, take a little bit of a broader view on things. And I didn't get comfortable with that for a while in my career, and, you know, it was something that was fine. It was my choice. I liked being in the role. I liked touching and making the game. But when I started seeing opportunities to try to maybe think a little bit differently about the impacting games, I started, okay, let me think differently about that bigger role. And when I thought about it as producing Maxis, building the kind of teams and the vision, and really starting to embrace the superpowers of what Maxis really means, which is, you know, empowering creativity through play. All of a sudden I'm like, you know, that's actually not so different than what I'm doing in terms of making games. I have to work with a team of people, and I have to build a great team of people and suggest a vision that people might want to contribute to. So I think it's, you know, I'm going to leave you just with this idea that, you know, these beats that become part of you, that make you who you are, you know, whether it's a, you know, advocate and you're doing what you must, or, you know, an entrepreneur, which is such a brave role to take on. I think it's pulling down into those values and that experience that you've had throughout your life that ultimately you need to draw from. And definitely reaching out and connecting with people to share those experiences, because we just don't have time to get them all as quickly as we want in our own lives. So. I'm not sure we have any time for questions.
We do, actually. We have about 8 minutes.
Okay.
So.
See Max taking a greater role.
You know, we've been doing a lot of outreach in terms of STEM. So we did things with SPORE and giving it to kids. The fact that we've just allowed the Glass Lab Foundation the source code and work with it. These are all ways in which we're kind of trying to reach out to that space and affect people. We ourselves are not doing the educational aspect of it. One thing about working in public schools is this desperate need that they have for assessment. And one of the things I'm trying to influence through my role with electronic arts and what we're trying to do with Glass Lab is I don't think it's just about playing the game and having the experience. I think it's about allowing kids to sort of express what they're getting out of it. So it's not all about here's the scenario that you're playing and assess you. It's about what did you experience with it. And some of the most dynamic teachers in public schools are coming up with different programs like that. But to me, the things that are influencing me are also things like Minecraft and Roblox and getting kids coding. I mean, we're so far behind in that in our school system. So I'm trying to ultimately resurrect some of the stuff that we did in Sin City. That's just about, it's a real easy way to create a little simulation, which is scripting. And I want to basically get schools doing that. We're already doing it with some of the bows and blacks of Minecraft as well, with the Glass Lab.
I love the part about starting out with the outdoor play. I'm wondering if being Access or anybody is thinking about building bridges from online to offline and outdoor play. I know MIT has some really cool stuff with Vanished, the pilot program, try to get kids outside.
You know, I wouldn't say that we're, you know, on that course right now. We're sort of doing that as, you know, here we've got the educational aspect of things. But I do think that's what's so amazing about gaming. It changes fast. And it keeps you so on your toes because the minute you think you know exactly how to go about doing what you're doing, there's sort of principles of applications. And it is making it so that gaming and, you know, now that you're carrying this around with you, it can start to blur the lines between, you know, something that immerses you this way to something that exposes you to the world with purpose. And I think that gaming, the one thing that it absolutely has to it is a sense of structure and purpose that allows you to sort of think forward. And I think that's a very compelling thing, particularly for kids who want to make a difference. So if they can use that to express that, I think that's, again, yet another benefit of it. In the back. What?
You can go ahead.
No, you had your hand up. Go ahead. And I'll come back to you in a second.
Hello, my name is Paula.
Hi, Paul.
My question to you is, it seems like you always had a knack for following your passion, from college, well, as a child to college until now. What advice do you have when you just face a hurdle? You know it's something you're supposed to be doing, but you just face a hurdle in the road. Like, what is your advice?
Well, I will give you, I mean, while I had a core and I knew what I loved doing, I wouldn't say my path in life was necessarily a direct one. I see a lot more kids today, and honestly, there are such strong programs at colleges in terms of interactive media, and we have interns who come out who have done more in their lives in terms of, dedicated to their passion. The one thing I fear for them is I traveled after school for about 9 months in Southeast Asia, spending about 30 cents a day. And I think those experiences are important too. But I don't know that one could say, oh, there's just a clear-cut path. What you can do is you can say, what's core, and am I waking up really passionate about what it is that I'm doing? There's definite opportunities that come along to kind of take a bite of. And I think, the mere fact that you're sitting here today, you're obviously kind of grabbing onto an opportunity to connect, share, and sort of see what there is out there. I can't, tell you how strongly that's an important part. You need to pull. And when you do, it's amazing how much people will share. And I've had the fortune to have some incredible mentors. Jerry Laymore, Nancy Smith, Bing Gordon, Luke Bartlett, Will Wright, in my life that have helped me kind of, get there in terms of it. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I was able to reflect on some of these things. But taste and try, gain some experience, and then think about how does that actually help me move forward in what it is that I do. Because every experience builds upon your own sort of integrity, your own sort of character. I was a kid. And I had to get up every morning, at like 5 o'clock in the morning to literally done things. Just that sheer, tenacity to do that in the winter and everything, it still built who I was. So.
Curious, your sister walks at night all the time? What's she doing now?
My sister is a research librarian, and she is, whenever I do need a search that extends past my capabilities, sure. The other thing is we kind of scattered all over the place, but one thing I often say, my kids have 3 modes. So my sister, Charlotte, has been a huge part of my life and in helping me, on that one. And I think it's funny how in our culture today, sometimes I think we've forgotten that we're so dependent upon ourselves. Strong individuals and stuff like that. And I realize just how much you get from just asking and kind of reaching out and saying, I do need a little help up here. And so my sister is now very much open to money.
After the team assembly kind of structure, what have you found is the best way to affect change when you're trying to implement something into a new project?
Well, because it's a very, gaming, when we make these big AAA games, even mobile games, it's about a creative collaboration. And I think, so first of all, one of the things I often do is I basically put on the table, well, how many different risks are we going to take? Spore is an example of taking every risk that was in the book. New engine, completely bespoke technology, completely a genre that didn't exist. Editors, plus games, and 5 different games. Okay? When you lay that table, you're going to have to make some very, very deliberate choices. And I think, some of the stuff that I'm really proud about in that game, it wasn't the biggest financial success, but boy, it's something that I look back on with absolute pride. It was unbelievably amazing to make these creatures and have them come to life for you and everything. So understanding exactly what table you're laying out and making really critical decisions and making sure that everybody on the team understands those decisions and why we're making them, because it's really easy with a team, particularly the size of our teams today, for you to kind of, get a little bit of drift. I think, was it Hillary was saying, you can't let your customer lead, you, particularly in these technology startups. I've watched many a startup get distracted because they just created some poor little technology, and the next thing you know, they're building advertising stuff. And I was like, whoa, how did that get there? You were building websites for kids. And it was interesting that it looked like a quick path to better funding, and ultimately it became a distraction. So those early decisions are really critical. And I think with that, we probably move to the next speakers.